You can do your first couple of deals with blind faith, but you can't run a business with blind faith. And what I mean by that is at some point you have to learn what business you're in. You have to know what things cost and what things don't cost. You have to know what a good bid looks like and what a bad bid looks like. Sometimes a great bid can be the most horrible thing for your project because they bid you too low and they're either going to change order you to death or do a horrible job or disappear halfway through. So you need to know what it costs for a contractor to do something, so that the bid comes in under cost. You know you have a problem contractor. So you work on relationships. Like one of the first things I tell contractors that I'm going to work with or possibly work with is I need wholesale pricing. I need that spot where you're making money, but I'm still getting a deal, and it's good for both of us. So those things are important.
Alrighty, hey guys, my name's Julian Castle, and welcome to the Julian Castle Experience. Today we got Don Costa. Don is a real estate investor who lost everything in 2008. He was over $1 million in debt, and he rebuilt from zero, and now he's running, one of the top wholesaling flipping companies. He's doing over 100 deals a year. Sometimes he's done over 200 deals a year. So he's gonna break down, what it's like to build a real business, like a real flipping business, and even started with no money. So we're gonna walk through his mindset and how he finds these deals, how he funds them, if he flips them, and how and all that, so that we can kind of set up the systems to scale as well. So Don, how are you doing today?
I'm good, man. How are you?
Good, man. It's great to have you. Thank you for being a veteran in the game, having all the scars, and then just sharing the lessons with us. That's great.
Definitely.
So Don, back in 2008, like what did you actually feel when you picture that moment where you're like in rock bottom?
The best way to tell that story is to kind of talk about it from the origin of getting into the business. I got into the business like most people who do, that have like no money, they don't come from money. And so I started, I was scared. It took me a few years to get the guts to jump in and get things going. And I got momentum out of the gate in 2003 when I started, 2004, 2005, the market was on fire, kind of like 21 and 22. Where it was like basically just real easy to make money. They say great market hides a bad business, and it did the same thing. I was a horrible business person, horrible leader, but I thought everything I touched turned to gold. So I thought I was unstoppable. I thought that I was the greatest thing since sliced bread. I thought the money was never going to end. So when the market did what it did in 2008, it wasn't just, I think, the whole kind of fear and anxiety of the market being traumatic and crazy and falling apart. My whole identity was in disarray. It was shattered because suddenly, I went from being able to touch anything and turn it into gold to basically I couldn't make a dollar if I basically worked my butt off 24/7. So it was a very, very hard time. I don't think anybody saw it coming, the fall that happened as hard as it did. And so I think if my identity wasn't tied to me being so great, 2008, I probably could have navigated a little better than I did. But it honestly sent me into this massive depression, this massive identity crisis, and it was a very, very traumatic and rough time.
Wow, I can imagine. I mean, having so much success and then everything is just harder, and I mean, that's incredible though. So what was the turning point? Like at what moment were you like, okay, I'm going to rebuild, but this time do it differently and actually, become a good business person or actually do things at scale,
I've been asked this before, and my answer is always the same. At that time, I had a family to support. I had a wife. I had kids. My world had fallen apart. I was, like I said, almost $1 million in debt. I had a judgment against me from another project I was working on. I didn't see an out. I didn't see a light at the end of the tunnel. I honestly tried to find a job. I mean, I hate to say it that way, but I did. I tried to find a job. I tried to go to work. I thought real estate was, it was a horrible thing. I thought it destroyed me. I thought it did me wrong. And what happened, if people who were around then will know, like you couldn't get a job. People weren't hiring, and anybody who was, I was either overqualified or undereducated because I have I have an AA degree. I don't have a bachelor's degree, and they wanted a bachelor's degree or better, and if they didn't, then I was overqualified. So it was really that I had no other choice. There came a point where it was like, okay, I'm sick of sitting here feeling sorry for myself. I'm sick of sitting here being depressed. I don't have a choice. Real estate is where I made money. I know what a deal looks like. I just got to find. At the time, I didn't even think wholesaling. I went out and I was like, I got to find somebody who believes in me, that's willing to back me financially.
Yeah.
And so that's what I did. Is I went to work to find a lender who would back me on a deal. And when I did, then it was kind of game on again.
Cool. Okay, so you were like, okay, I'm unemployable. I got to get back into the business and make it work this time. Right. And then you're like, I need to find a lender. So so great. Like, how'd you find this lender? Like, how'd you convince them? Like, where did you go from there?
I put an ad on Craigslist. I wrote something to the effect of, basically experienced flipper looking for private money backer, needs to be close enough to have a cup of coffee, something like that. I had 6 people reach out to me. One of which was somebody that I ended up meeting with. And there's a funny thing about confidence. Like people that have success, they forget what it's like to not understand what the next step is, or they forget what it's like to not have that confidence, that unshakable confidence. And especially when you're being beaten down a little bit. So I met with this lender multiple times at Starbucks, went to lunch a few times, and he basically was indicating that he would be interested in doing business together, but I just lacked the confidence to ask to go for the close, to say, okay, let's commit to doing something. And so I would talk with him for hours, and I would meet with him for hours, for days and days and days, but I never really pulled that trigger on, will you do a deal with me? Like, can I have that firm commitment? And then I was sitting at Starbucks with them for about three or 4 hours in on a Friday night, at probably one of my lowest points. The guy would talk for hours. I had to pee so bad, but I didn't want to get up and leave the conversation. And I got a text from my wife that said, basically, our water been shut off. And I was just like, okay, I can't be in the situation anymore. I can't be fighting just to survive anymore. And so it was in that moment that I was like, I have no choice. Again, it wasn't that I was this great guy who failed and picked himself back up. I kept getting backed into a corner where I had no choice. And I was like, I have no choice. I have to get a commitment from this guy to back me on a deal. And he did. In that conversation, he's like, go get something and I'll do it. So, and I went out there. It was a funny thing because it was like a flip of a switch. I went out there like I had multiple millions of dollars behind me, and I was going to be unstoppable. The second I knew I had that money, suddenly I was unstoppable, and I literally wore that like a cape, I had all the Superman power to do deals. And I always tell people you almost got to put yourself in that mindset. You got to act as if, because the second I was able to act as if I had what I needed to be successful, I was able to go out and be successful.
Oh my God, that's amazing. So you acted as if, right? And so you had this wavering confidence that then allowed you to go get the deal. So now like, what'd you do differently? Like, what were your habits like moving forward? To get the results, which was like do that first deal to get yourself back up.
Well, the first time I built the business, I didn't know what the business looked like. I just kind of stumbled into success, and like I said, I wasn't a very good leader. I was a bottleneck in my company. I didn't really have a plan. I let things kind of happen and, to me instead of me managing and making them happen. And so I knew going into this round, I was going to do different. Like the first round of flipping, contractors ran the show. Basically, they'd come in, they'd tell me 2 weeks and 20 grand, and 3 months later, I'd be spending 40 or 60 grand on these rehabs. But again, I was in a wonderful market that if it took me longer to flip the house, the properties went up in value. And so it didn't dawn on me that was an issue. And so I knew that I had to have, control. I always, when I speak about contracting, I always say there's the five most important things in contracting are control, and control, right? Yeah. That's our rehabbing, I should say, flipping properties. So having control of the project. So I knew I had to have that control. And, but also I knew I had to beat down doors. And so I literally called every agent, every Craigslist post, every the bandit signs in my market until I found people that would basically believe what I was saying, which is I told people I'm going to do 10 houses a month. I need people on my team willing to work with me and willing to bring me deals. And I had an agent that had a listing that had just fallen out that basically said, okay, let's do this one. And that was back in 2012, June of 2012, we closed on it. And that was my first rehab back in the game after losing everything.
Wow. Amazing. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about, so you found this partner, right? But what motivated your partner to get with you, right? What kind of offer did you give him, or what pitch? Like, what was the, how'd you get into the game with him?
Well, I mean, confidence goes a long way. When people lend, whether they're lending rate and term or JV, they're not lending always. They say they're lending on the deal, but they're not. They're betting on you. And so you got to be able to show somebody that no matter what, you're going to drag that project to the finish line, come hell or high water. And
Right.
so I had that because I knew I could rehab a property. That was one thing I knew I could do. So and then we did a JV. To be honest with you, I couldn't rub two nickels together, so I couldn't come up with a down payment, and there was no way I was making monthly payments. So I did a JV deal with the guy where basically he put up the money. I did 100% of the work. I identified the project. I managed the rehab, managed the sale of the property, and we split the profit right down the middle. So that was a lot of people when they're new. If you're out here listening right now and you want to get into rehabbing, but you're like, I don't have any money, find somebody and give up some of your profit, so you don't have that capital, string that noose around your neck of having to come up with the capital or having to make payments, right? That's the hardest thing to do in a rehab is to be shy of money for the rehab or be shy of money for the payment. So remove that aspect of it and do your first handful of projects with a JV partner until you get a track record, then go out and start looking for rate and term partners.
Nice. That's great. So, okay, cool. So you have already rehabbed some properties prior to that, right? In the, previous to the crash, right? So you had some experience. So, for the person that's looking to get started, how do you find a deal, and I guess what are some mistakes that you would have them avoid that you did to get that deal or secure that deal that's good?
So basically for me, what I did is OPM, other people's marketing. And I
Okay.
went out, I went out and everybody thinks OPM, other people's money, right? Other people's marketing.
Yeah.
Craigslist post, like I said, bandit signs, calling agents. Do you have any pocket listings? And that's how I built my business. I did a deal with that agent. We sold it in September of 2012. We made 20 grand. I got 10 grand in my pocket. It was gone before I even saw it because I had so many people to pay. But we picked up one the 31st of October and then closed on a second one November 1st that same year. Closed on a couple more right afterwards. All of them were through relationships I was building, either from wholesalers or agents, pocket listings. By June of 2013, I had almost 400 grand in the bank. So it was
Nice.
it was really pushing that momentum and working hard to build relationships. And that's really so. Round one, when I first started, I started door knocking pre-foreclosures. I got in my car and I just drove and I door knocked pre-foreclosures. That's how I built my business the first time.
Yeah.
100% subject to purchases, leveraged with private money, rehabbed them, resold them. Round two was 100% networking. And so I started my business twice, two different ways, and totally different, but both of them were very successful for me.
Okay, nice. OPM. Oh, there's people's marketing.
Other
Nice.
people's marketing.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Cool. And okay, sweet. And so I want to highlight something because you mentioned earlier that when you were flipping during the leading up to the 2008 crash, you were getting these deals and you were rehabbing them and stuff, and it was taking you more money to rehab them and everything. But then the market was so good that it was actually allowing you to sell these properties at a higher price, even at that. So
Right.
so what you do now that obviously it's 2012, 2013, so the market is changing. How are you able to now get the deals to go through without maybe spending more money on the rehab, or just pricing the numbers correctly so that that your profit was actually something that you would actually make.
You can do your first couple of deals with blind faith, but you can't run a business with blind faith. And what I mean by that is at some point you have to learn what business you're in. You have to know what things cost and what things don't cost. You have to know what a good bid looks like and what a bad bid looks like. Sometimes a great bid can be the most horrible thing for your project because they bid you too low and they're either going to change order you to death or do a horrible job or disappear halfway through. So you need to know what it costs for a contractor to do something. So if the bid comes in under cost, you have a problem contractor. You work on relationships. Like one of the first things I tell contractors that I'm going to work with or possibly work with is I need wholesale pricing. I need that spot where you're making money, but I'm still getting a deal, and it's good for both of us. So
Right.
those things are important. Establishing the expectation is important. Not betting the market, no matter what market you're in. In other words, what can I sell the house for today if I had to sell the house today? If I was able to snap my fingers and it was rehab, what can I sell it for today? That's my ARV. Okay, not what do I think it's going to be when I'm done. Because a lot of people will speculate. Even in 2001, 2000, or 2021, 2022, 2023, people were speculating. And a lot of people had a hard 2023 and a really hard 2024 because they got caught with projects they shouldn't have done because they were betting the market. So what can I sell the house for today? That's my ARV. So we don't deviate from that. We learned really quick what our buy box was. What projects were we going to say no to, and what projects were we going to say yes to, and we don't deviate from our buy box unless we have a really good financial incentive to do it, and because we know what we're good at, we know we're not. Like I don't do fire damage. I'm not good at fire damage, so I stay away from fire damage. And so establishing kind of those boundaries, systems, and processes in your business, and then when you rehab, one of the biggest mistakes I see rehabbers make is they don't either go into a project with a plan, or when they go in with the plan isn't a real plan. And they'll deviate and they'll change things along the way, and they'll add something else, and they'll move this wall and that wasn't planned on, and so on and so forth. When we make a plan on a project, the only time we deviate is if we have to. We open up a wall and there's termite damage we didn't expect, or there's something that has to be changed because of code or something else. That's the only time we deviate from the plan. We walk into the property knowing what we're going to spend and how we're going to spend it, and that does not change. And so our budget does not. You do $100 here and $200 there and $300 there and $400 there, and pretty soon you look up and you're $5,000, $6,000, $10,000 over budget, and you can't figure out how you got there. That's because you're deviating. You're not sticking to your plan. So I mean, there's a lot more to it, but the point is you have to be disciplined in this business. It's not HGTV. You can't just throw a sizzle feature in there and think you're going to get more money. It's not real. So
Okay, gotcha. Okay, cool. That's good. That gives us good insight. And usually, when you guys are doing flips, how much profit do you guys measure for your deals? Is it 20%? Is it, like, I guess it depends. Like your all-in number, your ARV, like what?
So I like a cash on cash return. So 15% is kind of my bottom line, to be honest. Sometimes I'll go a little lower depending on the project. If it's going to be an easy project, we try to get a better return than that. But essentially, I mean, the math works. If we're going to invest $200,000 in a project, we want to make 30 grand. If we're going to invest $300,000 in a project, we want to make 45 grand. So I mean, it's simple math. We underwrite it. We don't usually deviate much from that. And like again, unless there's a financial incentive to do so, or it's a super quick project. But for the most part, we stick to that.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. Okay, so this is pretty sweet. So we got a different little pockets to talk about. You already talked about the marketing pocket, right? Which is like you got to get your machine, the lead flow, right? So you were like other people's marketing, that's talking to wholesalers, agents, and that's how you were getting your marketing. Now, the next part of that is the sales part of it. Like, how do you, or what can you suggest to us in the sales part of it, like getting the good deals, negotiated and all that, so that they could work out? Do you have any insight on the sales part of it?
Yeah, I mean, I've been you're talking about acquisitions. I've been in the acquisition scene off and on since 2003 when I started door knocking pre-foreclosures. So I've done acquisitions in my own company off and on, depending on where my company was at through the years. I'm back in this seat now doing acquisitions, which we'll probably get into in a second. But and part of it is it's a learned skill set. It's putting yourself, like so many people are like, I don't want to have the conversation unless I know what the conversation looks like, unless I understand what perfect is. And for me, it's like, just have the conversation, because you're going to learn what not to say for sure. You're going to learn what to ask, and so every conversation I would have, I'd Monday morning quarterback that conversation. Where did I miss an opportunity? What questions could I have asked? Was there a pain point I overlooked? And it helped get my skill set better. So either hold yourself accountable to basically, Monday morning quarterbacking your conversations. You can record them now. Obviously, we couldn't necessarily do that back then. And you can listen to them back. You'd be amazed at what you hear and don't hear when you listen to your conversations back. And just critique yourself. If you need to get into sales training, there's some amazing sales trainers in the space. I'm great friends with a handful of them who are really good at their craft. I will say this, that even the best sales system doesn't, it'll forgive, some of the lack of skill and intuition and instinct. but nothing beats developing that intuition and instinct. So still be Monday morning quarterbacking yourself, and understand that, like, okay, so one of my claims to fame is sending out 1.2 million postcards in a year, right? I'm a big postcard guy. I'm doing postcard drops right now. People say postcards don't work. I can tell you what my cost per deal is on postcards. I can tell you, what my return is on postcards. I can also tell you that I'm averaging about 20 days from the point of first contact to contract. And that's important because I know that there's follow-up involved right now. Even with me sitting in the sales seat doing this exercise I'm doing, I know that there's follow-up involved. And so many people think it's like, if it's not an obvious deal in the first conversation, then I'm just going to move on to the low-hanging fruit. I had a guy who wanted $220,000 for his property when I first talked to him. And 12 days later, after 3 or 4 different conversations, I closed him at 180. So that's $40,000 delta, right? So understanding that it's not just obvious sometimes on the first conversation, and you got to start to look for those cracks and opportunities, and be willing to do that follow up is, I think, one of the biggest game changers on the sales side that a lot of people overlook.
Gotcha. Okay. So if you were to give us a little bit of training on sales, what are some things to look out for when you're having a conversation with the seller?
Listen more than you talk, I think, is one of the pieces of advice I would give. And then in that, I would look out for look, when people first talk to you, we're in an age of information. We're in an age of quick moving, knowledge and noise and everything else. So a lot of people don't know if you're a scammer. They don't know if you're trying to take advantage of them. So a lot of people are going to front and put a wall up. You need to, when a seller, they say they want X amount of dollars, you need to dig in and find out, like, is that something that they're really wanting? Or are they just trying to put a number out there because, they want to make sure they're not going to take advantage of? Like, what's the real reason you're having a conversation? And dig into that and find out, like, why are we even having this conversation? What's the pain point behind it? What's the catalyst for us being on this phone call? And then what is it going to take to solve that problem for them? And so you're listening for what they're really saying, right? What are you really saying here? What's the pain point that I can put some pressure on? What's the problem you need to solve? What do you feel like the solution is for me to solve that problem? And pay close attention to that. And it'll give you, if you're really listening to those things, you're going to see opportunities to navigate that conversation in your favor more and more. Hopefully that makes sense as it comes out of my mouth.
Yeah.
It's just really pay attention. Yeah. Pay attention. Listen. Ask questions. Ask more questions than you do talking. And it's going to open up a lot of stuff that a lot of people don't take the time to hear.
Of course. Cool. So now, what are some things that, like, I guess those are some things that are just maybe systematical, which are like, okay, how fast do you contact your lead, or how do you always book an appointment from a meeting, the next one, or what are some things that you can suggest that people do that kind of keep on the follow up, because sometimes people get off a call without a future call set up already, and so sometimes it could hurt the following just the follow up of the calls.
I don't. So I'm gonna, again, I'm sitting in the acquisition seat right now. I'm doing an exercise. I've sat in the acquisition seat before. I don't say that I call every single lead back within the minute of the lead coming in, because like right now I can't. So does that make or break the deal? It could in some situations, but it doesn't. I don't think it does in most. If it's a PPC lead, it definitely makes a difference. PPC lead, you need to be the first one to call. You need to call within minutes. You need to make sure that they know their problem's being solved. Yeah. But direct mail and some of those other leads, I don't know that you have to be as fast to the lead as you do with PPC, right? The marketing channel matters, okay, in that conversation. I'll have a conversation, and if it doesn't look like we're going to be able to come to a conclusion in that conversation, then I may say something to the effect of, do you mind if I just check back with you in a few days, or check back with you in a few weeks? I don't usually have I'm going to call you on Wednesday the 31st. I don't necessarily do that, but I'll say, do you mind if I check back with you? And then I'll set a reminder for myself to check back. If they say call me back in 3 months, I'm gonna call them back in 3 weeks. If they say call me back in 2 months, I'm gonna call them back in 3 weeks. Right? If they call me back in a month, I'm gonna call them back in a week. So whatever they tell me to do, I'm going to shorten that significantly because I've learned that situations, that people encounter, change and they may not want to make a decision right now, but something happens and they do, and they end up selling to somebody else if I'm not the one following up with them. So, so stay on top of it, most definitely. But I'll even follow up with people where they're saying, hey, if you're not here, don't call me back, and I'll still call them back and be like, hey, I just want to check in, and see how things are going for you and see if you found a buyer for your property, even when I haven't set that kind of permission to call back. So I think it's just you got to be consistent in what you're doing. And you got to come from a place of service, like you want to solve their problem. And sometimes the conversations you have, especially in follow-up, don't always need to be about making a deal. Sometimes it's just, hey, I'm checking in. How are things going? Did you find a resolution yet? Just letting you know if there's any way I can support you, I'm here. I'll check back with you in a few days. Sometimes that's enough to help really build that trust factor as well. So,
okay, that makes sense. Yeah, that's super cool. So, wonderful. And I just want to know your best line, if you have one. Just trying to be, they tell you like, what's your best rebuttal on price? If you have one that you use, like, or how do you get them to go to your price?
I'm a big anchorer.
Okay.
So, if somebody says basically like the house is worth 300,000, I get on the phone with them and they say they want 300, or they want 310, or they want 295. Then I'll say something to the effect of, it sounds like you're asking for, about retail of what the property would sell for if it was in perfect condition. Do you mind if I ask, is your property in perfect condition? Is it market ready? Or is there anything that needs to be addressed? That may be how I handle that. And then, I've said that and somebody says, well, no, it does need a little work. Okay, let's talk about what work it needs. And then I'll kind of get into the conversation. Or I've had people say, well, it doesn't sound like we're going to be able to do business. And I'll say, hey, I didn't say that I wasn't interested in buying your property. I'm just trying to get an assessment of, how it compares to properties on the market right now that have sold for that. And so, cause I still want to keep that door open. In the conversation, I may say something to the effect of, I'm going to be somewhere, it looks like I might be somewhere in the low 200s. Is that something you're willing to have a conversation about? And then again, if they say, well, that sounds like, we're too far apart. Well, then I might ask, like, where would you need to be for us to be able to make something happen? And so, because from the question position, I'm maintaining power. Where would you need to be? Well, I would need to be about 275. Okay. Well, it sounds like, you're at a number that's a little higher than I could probably pay. Are you negotiable on that? Let me ask a few more questions to see if I may be able to come up on my number. So I'm non-committal in what I say and how I direct my questions, and then I'm trying to close that gap in the conversation. And sometimes it happens in the conversation, and sometimes it happens over a couple of conversations. Like I talked about the gentleman on the initial call wanting $220,000. And then after 3 or 4 conversations, I got him down to 180. So I just kind of broke him down over several conversations. So it doesn't always happen having the first one, but again, it's non-committal, asking questions, anchoring, and then I always anchor at a number that I can come up from, so that I can make them feel like they're winning in the negotiation, if that makes sense. It's very intentional on what I do.
Yeah, that makes sense. Cool. I love those tips. Cool. So now that you're building this business, right? We have marketing, we have sales, and then we have people. Like obviously you're not the only one in your company, right? So what kind of tips can you give us, from that perspective of being a business owner, and putting in the people in the right seats that can help you run your business effectively?
Yeah, so I think one of the most important pieces of advice I can give is hire the person before the experience. So many people are looking to fill a seat with experience, and I've learned that I would rather have the right person who's teachable and loyal and develop them into who I need them to be than to try to hire somebody off the street that fits some kind of experience, level that I think that they should have. And I've learned that the hard way, to be honest with you. I've hired people in to fit a role based on experience, and they've done more damage to my business than I care to even talk about. And I've developed people, that had very little experience in the role, but had the right talent, the right skill set. They were the right type, talk about the disc test, right? They were, somebody that belonged in an assistant role or a processor role or, that type of thing. So, and I developed them into who I needed to be, and they were some of the best team members I ever had. So, teachable and coachable, making sure that they're somebody that's going to be loyal to the organization, and that they're somebody that you can grow and develop. I think the other thing I would say about building a team is understand when you outgrow somebody. I think that's the hardest part for us as business owners is we'll keep people way too long. The right person in the right seat for right now may not be the right person in the right seat 2 years from now when your company's doubled in size or tripled in size. And understanding that and either reposition them in your organization where they are the right fit or setting them free is one of the hardest things to do, but one of the most important things we can do as leaders.
Gotcha. Yeah, that sounds like a tough conversation to have, especially they've been with you for 2 years and you're like, hey, we've outgrown, we're going to a different path or something. So that's interesting. And so what do you recommend people hire people? If someone's doing deals consistently, for example, and they want to get their first person, what person should they get, and how do you go about finding them?
So I always say that the first hire should be the person who can do what you absolutely hate to do. Okay. Yeah. What you're not good at or what you hate to do, it needs to come off your plate. Okay. So that should be your first hire. Because usually the things we hate to do or we're not good at are the things that are hindering us from moving forward in our business or growing in our business or actually working on our business. So that's your first hire. Your second hire should be that person who takes whatever it is that's on your plate that's stopping you from doing the things that move your business forward or make your business money. And that's going to be different for everybody, right? So for me, a project manager was one of my first hires. Acquisitions was one of my last hires. I was good at acquisitions. I liked acquisitions, so it was one of my last hires. So for some people that are in the business that really hate talking to people, and there are people that get in this business that do that, acquisitions may need to be their first hire. So as far as finding people, I found people through Wise. I found people through Indeed. I found people through networking, Craigslist. I've found people by just, well, who do you know that might be good for this position? So I think that all of the above works well when, again, you're consistent with it. Understanding that some roles they're probably like lead managers. I think finding the right lead manager for your organization, which I think is one of the most important roles in an organization. Yeah. I think that comes from like, who do you know more than anything else? That would be good at this, right? Do you know anybody who, is a stay-at-home mom that might need some part-time work in the beginning or, something like that? Project manager roles, I picked from the pool of people I knew, but that could be something that comes from Craigslist or Wise or Indeed. So, and it just, I think it depends on the role in your organization and where your organization's at, as far as how you go about bringing them in. So, but all of the above works.
Gotcha. And when you're bringing someone in, what should you have in place? Like training, core values. Like I guess what was what you had in place or what you have in place now?
So it depends, right? Like when I brought my first lead manager in, I brought her in and I set her down. And I was honest with her. I said, I don't know what this position ultimately looks like. I said, we're at point A, and I said, I know what I want it to look like when it's done, but I don't know what that middle is going to look like, and I don't know how much that middle is going to change my ending expectation of the position. And I said, so we need to work together to help build that. And so I met with her multiple times a day. How's it going? What are your challenges? What are the things you're running into? And we started to build systems and expectations kind of around those things. And then it went from multiple times a day to once a day to every other day to once a week we'd meet as she kind of grew and helped develop that position. So in the beginning, I think a lot of people feel like they have to have everything in place for that position and before they even hire. And for me, I'm more of a jump off the cliff and build the airplane on the way down. So we built out the position together. And then I ended up hiring 4 more lead managers. At my highest point, I had 5 lead managers working with me. She helped build the training for the next one. And then they worked together to build the training for the last 3. And that worked out really, really well for me. So I would say that as you're building systems doesn't have to be built before you hit go, right? You start your engine. You can actually build and document as you're initially training in that first role. So that's important. I think the expectation of what you need right now And what good and bad looks like in that role is the most important thing you need to start with, regardless. Being able to set a standard, set boundaries, and have that expectation, that conversation with somebody. And then depending on where you're at in your business growth, you can either develop that position with them, or you can have already developed that position and have all the training ready for them to go.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. Hey, great. And just for I guess some context, how big is your team now? How much are you doing in revenue? And if you can't share those numbers.
So I'm doing an exercise right now, and we talked about this before we launched the show. So at my height, my team was 18. My biggest team was 18 people. We have had variations through the years. Since COVID, most of my team has been VAs and virtual, with the exception of like project management and stuff like that for rehabbing, and a couple other key roles being local. But right now, and so I would say not right now, at the end of 2024, I decided I was going to embark on something completely nuts. I had a lot of the team I had it had either moved on or was ready to move on in different roles in moving on in their life or moving out of the area we lived in or for various reasons. And I wanted to do something that I didn't get to do the last two times I built my business, which was document. And that a lot of people have been struggling, 2024 especially. 2025, I've seen it. A lot of people are struggling in the market. Some people started in 2020, had a really good ride in 21 and 22, 23, and now they're struggling. You see on Instagram and Facebook, a lot of people saying, I'm thinking about getting out of the business, or I thought about getting out of the business, because it's been a hard couple of years. So,
yeah.
And I'm hearing all the excuses. And so I'm like, look, when you're in a position like a lot of these guys who are on, that are influencers at this point in time, we forget about the momentum we have and how important that momentum is that we built. And so we just think that momentum is so easy, and we try to talk to people like it's easy. And so I'm doing an exercise right now where I'm literally building a business from scratch. So I'm handling pulling the list, I'm handling the marketing, I'm handling the sales calls, I'm handling the projects, I'm handling the dispo, and I'm going to build a new team around me in that sense. And I have a little bit of help. I am cheating a little bit. I have a little bit of help from some of the people on my original team who may or may not stay in this exercise, but I'm literally building from scratch. So this last couple of months, we've been testing a lot of different marketing channels. We've been testing the KPIs. We've been looking at the results, looking at the response rate. And, what's our cost per deal? What's our average return per deal, right? How long is it taking us to put things in contract? And so going into 2026, my goal from basically January 1st to 2026 is to use the knowledge I've gained over the last few months and of retesting from scratch without the momentum and saying, okay, how fast can I build a company that does 100 houses a year with a brand new team, with me sitting in the seat having to build everything around me. And I'm documenting it, which I'm going to put out a lot of content in 2026, so people need to watch out for that. Because it's a whole different experience when you're the one answering the calls and having to check on the projects and project manage and get the marketing out. It's a whole different experience, and which is what most people go through, if that makes sense.
Of course, yeah. I mean, the person who's starting the business, I mean, he has to wear all the hats first before he's ever,
right.
Able to delegate them. And so, unless you have a partner, but still,
right.
So that's great. Wonderful. So you're in this documenting phase. That's wonderful. You mentioned something about systems. So like, when did you realize that you needed systems and not just more hustle?
Early on, it was, look, it's like, my first business, I was a bottleneck. I had to make all the decisions. So, I learned that I needed to put people around me that I could trust to make decisions and give them the opportunity to make those decisions and give them the permission to make mistakes, because I make mistakes too. So that was part of it. Understanding that I didn't like the business controlling me. I think it was more of, I don't think I realized in the beginning that I was building systems in my business as much as I was like, okay, I don't like this. What can happen so I don't have to deal with this anymore? So for instance, like paying contractors, right? And paying vendors. a lot of people who manage projects know that like somebody will finish something and they'll start bugging you for a check on a Tuesday, and then somebody else is bugging you for a check on a Wednesday. And so it's, we put a system in place that we only pay out on Fridays, and you have to invoice us a week ahead of time in order to get paid out on Friday. And that system evolved to allow us to manage a lot of things in our business. But essentially in the beginning, it was just so I didn't have to chase my tail trying to get people paid. And so I started implementing things along the way that said, okay, what's going to make our life easier? Software as a system. Like what software in your business, like a CRM, is going to make your life easier? People are I consider part of the system. Who can I put in a seat and get permission to own that seat that's going to make my life easier? And then processes, right? What processes am I going to implement in my business that that we have kind of rules that we live by? They're going to keep us from running into problems that we could run into down the road. So.
Right. Okay, cool. So yeah, the systems are important. And then, what kind of KPIs you track? You mentioned some KPIs just recently, but what are the most important KPIs that you track and you think that are like kind of the lifeblood of the business that can tell you if you're having a healthy business or a, unhealthy business?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of things you can measure in your business from a marketing standpoint. Basically, how much are you spending to how much of a return are you getting? That I think is extremely important. Like, I know that right now I'm averaging on my own, sitting in the seat, doing acquisitions, not being in this role for almost a decade. I'm averaging about $6,000 per deal for direct mail in the Central Valley in California. I'm getting deals on an average for about $6,000 per deal with direct mail. A lot of people out there saying direct mail doesn't work anymore. I'm proving that it does. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm averaging about 20 days from the first contact to contract. Okay. I've had some that I've locked up the next day after the first call, and some that have taken me a little over a month to lock up, but I'm averaging about 20 days. And I know that I'm getting right now in this market, in this climate, based on me probably not completely dialed into the acquisition seat, I'm averaging about a 5-to-1 return on direct mail, which means for every dollar I spend, I'm getting $5 back on average as a return, which isn't horrible, but it's not a home run, but it's good, right? And so what that does for me is I'm able to set the expectation for roughly about every $6,000 that I spend, I'm going to get a deal, and for every dollar I spend, I'm going to get $5 back. And so that allows me to clearly make decisions on my marketing, how I'm going to do my marketing, how I'm going to deploy my marketing, how much marketing I'm going to deploy, and we're tracking that. So along the way, you're tracking things like what's the response rate. Right now for direct mail, and I'm talking to people around the country, direct mail, we're getting about a 0.4% response rate, which is less than 0.5%. Okay, so that's the expectation. Okay, if we get less than that, what did we do wrong? Out of the calls, how many calls are leading to leads? Right now, about 60 to 70% of the calls I'm getting are take me off the list or some other colorful language. So you start to be able to break those things down, and you start to be able to predict in your business. But you can also see, okay, if we perform this way 3 times and on 4 we didn't, did we do something different, or did we do something wrong that we need to go back and look at? Because a lot of people operate blind in their marketing, and when you operate blind, you operate in fear. And when you're operating in fear, when one little bump in the road happens, you do the one thing you shouldn't do in your business, which is you shut down your marketing or you pull it back a little bit. And so understanding the numbers, that's the first thing you need to understand, is understanding the numbers in your marketing and understanding what's working and what isn't working, and being able to move that dial gives you a lot of power in being able to control your revenue in your business.
Yeah, totally. Okay, great.
So hopefully that helps.
yeah, that makes sense. Cool. And so, what's do you have like do you have a leadership philosophy? Like, is there something that you have as a philosophy when it comes to like building your team, or through your team?
They're essentially give people the power to fail, give people the power to make mistakes. I mean, that's I think one of the most important things that I've learned as a leader. There's a lot of things that I would say from a philosophy standpoint that I could basically share. But I think at the core, I want to surround myself with people that aren't afraid to make decisions. aren't afraid to go out on a limb to try to help the company. And because we all grow from our mistakes. The only reason that I'm here today is because I failed so badly so many times. And, I know what not to do, and I'm learning more and more what to do. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
but at the end of the day, that's I want people around me that are strong enough and smart enough and courageous enough to make decisions. I have to give them permission to make mistakes in order to do that.
Yeah, you want to be resilient so that you can, have them make decisions, learn from it, and then keep going, and then have success, right?
I want them to own the role. I want them to own the role. I don't want to have to think about the role when they're in it. Absolutely, 100%. Yeah.
Right. And when we were talking about some things that you talked about, like the CRM, different things, like what kind of tech stack do you use, in order to run your operations? If you could share.
On the top level, Slack for communications, I think, is huge. We don't text or email amongst each other when it comes to making decisions about properties. We do it in Slack, so it's documented in one channel. Underneath that, you can set channels for each property. So all communications for the property are in a channel. That's huge for us. Our CRM is Forefront. We utilize Forefront CRM, and a CRM is very important. Smartphone is the phone system we use. Having the right phone system. CallRail and Smartphone, I think, are the two biggest ones out there. CallRail has horrible lag, and I think that call quality, in my opinion, call quality is very important when you're trying to have a good conversation with somebody.
Yeah.
Let's see here. You want me to name them all off? We use a Dispo tool that's in investor base we like very much for finding buyers and building a buyers list. Trying to think through everything we do. Obviously, there's a number of QuickBooks we utilize in our business. A lot of Google Drive stuff, obviously, in our business. So there's a number of things we utilize, but I think the most important when it comes from the tools out there for real estate investors is having the right phone system. Definitely having a CRM that you use. I don't know if there's a best one out there, but the one you use is the best one. And then having a good tool to help you with Dispo, I think I would say are my top three. As far as like rehabbing and stuff like that, I've never been one to utilize any kind of tool out there for rehabbing. We use Google Docs and Slack and a lot of communication. We whiteboard things out a lot, in our business. So kind of old school that way.
That's cool. Yeah, that's awesome. And when it comes to, you mentioned your market. I don't think you really talked about your market, but are you doing it in your backyard, or like where are you operating in? Because I think the market has a big, a big reason why for your success or not. I mean, it's harder, to make a lot more money in different markets than some,
Yeah. You gotta. I mean, it's relative, right? If you go to Boston, for instance, it's going to cost you $20,000 to $25,000 per deal in direct mail in order to get a deal, but your return is going to be six figures. You go to the Bay Area of California, it's going to be kind of the same thing. It's going to cost you $20,000 to $25,000 to do a deal, but your return is going to be six figures. Here it's going to cost you between $3,000 and probably, I would say, $6,000 to do a deal, but your return isn't going to be six figures. So it is relative, but it's also relative in your cost for acquisitions per deal as well. I'm in the Central Valley, California. I've done up and down the state. I've done rehabbing in other states. I've done wholesaling in other states, like Tennessee and in Missouri and South Carolina. So, but primarily right now we're concentrated on the Central Valley of California. I won't rehab. I used to rehab all over the place. I won't rehab. I'll go an hour and a half north, an hour and a half south now to rehab. So if anything comes into our pipeline that's not within that radius, then we'll just wholesale it. So, but it kind of depends on where I'm at in my business and what the just what's going on in the real estate world as to how many areas we're marketing in and doing business in, if that makes sense. I think a lot of people, there's a saying that didn't hit when it was first told to me, and they'd say go deep before you go wide. A lot of people think that they need to go into multiple markets to do more deals. Unless you specialize in being a national wholesaler, and that's just who you're going to be. I think that you really need to dig as deep into your home market before you start to go into other markets, because it is it's a division of resources. When you start
Yeah.
to do that, it's a division of marketing dollars, it's a division of team time. And whenever you go into a new market, I don't know how experienced you are, I don't care how experienced you are, it's going to be a little bit of a bloodbath because every market has different nuances on what buyers are willing to buy, what the rehab costs are, how quickly something moves, what marketing piece works, and so on and so forth. So every market has somewhat of a learning curve, and the people don't account for when they think they're just going to start to jump into multiple markets.
Yeah, that is true. It's hard. It's hard to do nationwide. Now, what do you think? When it comes to what you're doing now, like, what do you think is the biggest challenge you're facing? Or what is the biggest thing that you're overcoming as you?
Putting myself back into the fire, so to speak, and putting myself back into all
Yeah.
the seats. It's you don't sit in a role for a long time, and so I guess just reacquainting. I can sit here and teach people exactly how to rehab a property and what to do and how to do it and how to borrow the money and how to cash flow your business. But when you're in there and you're seeing the day-to-day mechanics of it, it does shine some light on some things that you may have forgotten about. And so like reacquainting myself with working with contractors again, like how quickly they're trying to take advantage of the situation or take advantage of you,
Wow.
and how quickly you have to put your foot down in order to make sure and set expectations so that doesn't happen. Sitting down and negotiating with vendors. One of the things that I will say, my project manager for a decade was incredible. But over the last handful of years, he's bought it's inflation, it's inflation, it's inflation. And I'm like, you know, it doesn't, if it's labor, inflation doesn't affect the labor that much, okay, to get the deal done. Come on, let's sit down and have a
Yeah.
real conversation about what labor should be on this. Or, sitting down with vendors and, renegotiating, like, okay, what's the best deal that you can give me on this? I sat down with my cabinet granite vendor the other day and I was like, look, I said, I'm gonna come out of the gate in 2026, and I'm gonna be doing X amount of deals a month, and we need to have a real conversation about what things are costing you and what you can give me, what prices you can give me. And so I was able to get an extra 20% off of what we were doing. So it's just reacquainting. It's like, even though I know the stuff, it's like, okay, reacclimating into, people. And let me re-answer the question. People are the hardest part. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Reacclimating to people and reestablishing the rules of engagement, and kind of getting my bearings back has been interesting, to say the least.
Of course, of course. That sounds amazing. So, you mentioned quite a bit of like different things and scenarios, but for people out there that are listening, like, what is a contractor trying to get advantage of you? Like, how does that look like, and how do you protect, yourself? You know.
It's like anything else. You got to find good people, and you got to weed out the bad ones quickly. The contractors that I try to work with are people that are usually about a year in the business, and they haven't quite figured out the marketing, so they don't have a strong book of business, but they still got talent. And then I'm
Yeah.
looking for somebody that's teachable and coachable. And so, and then there's this is like a 2-hour conversation, right? But in a nutshell, there are good contractors and bad contractors, and you just got to very quickly learn how to recognize them. Are they asking for a lot of money up front? Like, I don't do any deposits because there's no reason for you to need 25 grand to do the demo on a project. I'm looking for, are they bidding? Like, do they know their business well enough to bid properly? I'm looking for line item bids so I know exactly what's going to be in the project, so they can't come back later and say that's not in the project. There's a lot, and even good people will try to take advantage of you. So, we're doing a project, we're wrapping a project right now where I brought somebody in that we worked with, 6 or 7 years ago, and thought that they would be great. And they ran through the project super fast. That was issue number one, like the quality of work. They were just trying to get things done too quick. But the other issue was like, you've done $5,000 worth of work, but you're asking me for a $10,000 payment. Like, what's the issue here? And then we negotiate, and I give them a little more than I think I should give them. And then, basically they wouldn't show up for a week, and then they'd come back, and then they would do like a day's worth of work and ask for another $3,000 payment. It's like that, right? I had to nip that in the bud right away. I had to sit down and have a conversation. It was like, I can yank you from this job with somebody else on it, or you're going to follow my rules. And so I think what we do as rehabbers sometimes, and I've been guilty of this in the past, is we check our our rules, at the door. We check our, basically ourselves, our confidence at the door, and allow the contractor to dictate to us how things should be. And just being back in the seat, I'm learning really quick, like foot down, set the rules, let them know that I have no problem replacing you. Let's find a place where we can work on this together, and in a space we can live in together, and let's go. And if you don't, contractors will run you up and down, left or right, flip you upside down, shake all the money out of your pockets. And even the good ones will do it if you're not careful.
Wow, 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 wow. Okay. And okay, so you mentioned the people, getting acquainted to the people, that's the biggest thing, right? That you have to
Right.
challenge. So what can you give us some tips or advice, like how do you, maybe some principles or frameworks that you've developed over the years that maybe you're conscious about, that you can, share with us that would help us, be better when it comes to dealing with people, with the
I'll take it from a contractor standpoint as far as the answer goes. If I really, really like you on the first meeting, I'm not going to give you a job. I found that the people that are really likable, they utilize their personality to get work, but their work isn't usually backed up. As far the personality doesn't back up their work. In other words, they don't do a great job. So if I really like you when I first meet you, I'm not working with you. Yeah. Trusting your gut, like if something doesn't feel right, smell right, sit right, don't talk yourself into doing something that doesn't sit well. Again, I'll have I'll call somebody, I'll be like, okay, I'm a rehabber. Okay. I tell them right out of the gate. Half of them are going to disqualify themselves. Allow them to disqualify themselves. Don't talk them into working with you. Then I let them know that I need wholesale pricing, and the other half is going to, not the other half, but half of the half is going to disqualify themselves. Again, don't talk them into working with you.
yeah.
The ones that are like, okay, I get it. You're a rehabber. You need wholesale pricing. I'm willing to do it. I always ask them to show me a job that they're working on, not one that they finished. I don't care about the accolades they get from somebody because they're only going to give you the best recommendations anyway. So go look at a job that they're working on and see if what they're telling you lines up with what you see in reality. Is the job safe? Is the job clean? Is the quality of work there? Are they saying they're supposed to be done in 3 days, but it looks like they need 3 months worth of work? Like, what are you seeing versus what they're telling you? And then make your decision from there. If everything feels accurate and right. Oh, the last thing I always ask them is, I'll point out something that I don't like. And I'll even do this in job interviews. Like I'll throw somebody a curveball because I want to see how you handle it. So I'll point out something that I don't like on the job and I'll say, basically, this doesn't fit my standard. The best contractor I've ever worked with, he still does work for me to this day and since 2012. He said, basically, Don, if you don't like it or redo it, no questions asked. That's what you want in somebody. The guy who says, well, the homeowner was rushing us, or, yeah, I fired the guy who did that, I will never, ever work with that person because they're not accepting accountability. I want the guy who's going to accept accountability, and that's who I'm going to work with. And it's the same thing with team, right? You want somebody on your team that, is going to be teachable and coachable and going to accept responsibility and admit when they fail and get up and shake it off and go and learn from their mistakes and go out and get better. And that's who I try to surround myself with.
Okay, that's amazing. Thank you. So how does your day look like? What do you do with it? Like, how do you structure your day so that you have success?
Let me put it in context. My day looks like I own multiple businesses, and so I get up and I work on them in order of basically how they need to be addressed in my day. I try to give myself free time in my day to utilize my mind, which is how I make money, right? Come up with ideas, come up with opportunities, come up with new strategies, solve whatever problems we're dealing with. So I try not to just overwhelm myself in a day. Now, when you are brand new in this business or newer in this business, I think 100% of your day that you utilize for work should be that's free from what you actually have to do in your day, should be focused on building relationships in your business, building private money relationships, building contractor relationships, building buyer relationships, building relationships with other people in your market that you can create synergies with and opportunities with. That's what I think your day should look like. Vendors, creating relationships with vendors so that you can get net terms with them or get discounts from them. So your day should be built around relationships. Obviously, you're going to get up and you're going to have to handle whatever fires are there, work on whatever projects you're working on, dispo whatever deal you have. But after that, you should be building those new relationships. And I still do that to this day. I'm still building new relationships, opening new doors, and looking for new opportunities.
That's amazing. Cool. Okay, great. So, you know, when it comes to this business, you know, they say it's a sales and marketing business when it comes to wholesaling, right? When it comes to flipping, you know, what are the differences between the businesses and where should someone start? You know.
The mechanics of the front end of the business, I don't think are that different. Okay. The thing is like great wholesalers are usually not great rehabbers, and great rehabbers are usually not great acquisition, like great direct to seller marketers, right? That's what we see a lot of in this business. I've been fortunate enough to be good at both, mostly because I was really good at rehabbing and I started marketing really heavy, and then I wanted to monetize the leads that we didn't want. Then we got good at wholesaling as well. So, but I would love it if every wholesaler and every rehabber was a great marketer. You need to be a great marketer. I think every rehabber should be at least have somewhat of a buyer's list to be able to dispo the stuff that doesn't work or fit their buying box that they come across. But so they should be able to monetize every lead. From a wholesaler standpoint, it is a sales and marketing business. You need to be great at sales and marketing on both sides, from the acquisition side to the dispo side. You want to monetize to the fullest. On the rehab side, systems and process, and again, I think systems and process is good in both, but systems and process is even more important. You're making sure you're properly capitalized, making sure you have proper capital resources, making sure you're working with the right contractors, that you're working on the right timeline, the deals are being finished, like you're starting and finishing them when you should, so you're maximizing profit. And so you really need to understand, at that point in time, you really need to understand, what things should cost, how things should be done, what successful projects should look like. You need to understand that side of the business and the mechanics of the business and build systems around it flowing properly. So I don't know the answer to that question or not, but at the end of the day, I do think both sides should be great marketers. And
For
I
sure.
really think that if you could become great at marketing, especially as a rehabber, you can be great at marketing and dispoing and be a great rehabber, you're unstoppable. In a market, and that's what
Yeah.
helped us become successful. Yeah.
I'm curious. So obviously you had a different start than most of us because you've been in the game for longer. Now, how's your way to getting into the game different from how someone or how you would advise someone to get into the game now with all the resources that are available now? Like what would you suggest?
Well, we didn't have YouTube University, and we didn't have podcasts, and we didn't have the influencers in the space that, which is a good and bad thing. Some influencers are incredible, some of them are noise, but
Yeah.
I didn't have any of that. I used to print off my route for door knocking off Microsoft Streets and Maps, and I'd flip through the paper, right? GPS in cars wasn't even really a thing. So, now I think part of the problem for people getting started is there's so much information out there that they don't even know where to start with it. So my advice there is find somebody that resonates with you, that you feel good about, and then listen and do what they tell you to do and take action on it. Get out there and do it. There are so many tools out there to make your life easier, but they can also become overwhelming. And so I would say don't get into the noise so much that you're so busy trying to figure out your logo and what your company name should be and what tool you should use, as you're not out there trying to find sellers. I think the most important thing right now is find somebody that resonates with you, and then get out there and start talking to sellers, start calling other people's, marketing, start building relationships, and start talking to sellers. I think everything else is noise when you're new. Don't worry about
Yeah.
your website. Don't worry about your company name. Just do ABC Inc. if you have to register something so that you have an entity if that's what you feel you need, and just get out there and start talking to sellers. And once you start making revenue on that first deal or second deal, then let's worry about, do I need investor base? Do I need a CRM? Do I need this? Do I need that? That's when those things start to matter. So get out there and do it. That's the biggest thing that I've done. Now, the third time I'm doing it is I'm doing it. The difference between the first time I was door knocking pre-foreclosures and I was doing it 100%, I was OCD about it. The second time I was networking and I was doing it 100%, I was OCD about it. I didn't have a business card. I didn't have a website. This time, I'm doing it. I shouldn't say the last time because I'll probably do it again because I like this stuff. I'm spending the money on marketing. I'm going through the different marketing channels. We're going to be testing YouTube here, and I'm testing the different marketing channels. I'm saying, okay, what's my cost per deal? What's my time between acquisition, like I said, first contact to contract? And I'm looking to see what's working in the market today because people are trying to tell me that marketing isn't working, and I'm proving that it is. And so I'm spending the money. So if you have resources and you have the knowledge, go out there and spend the money and make it happen. And that's what I'm doing this time. So whatever you're going to be able to do consistently, get out there and do it. You have no excuse. It's so easy to do now. The information is right in front of you. Just make it happen.
Amazing. And for the people that are listening that maybe are doing a deal or two a month, like they got it, they got the basics, they're doing deals. How do you scale? What is the step, or how did you scale? And do more deals, a month, 10 deals a month, or et cetera.
I said I was going to do 10 deals a month, and there's something about me saying I'm going to do something, and it comes true, if that makes sense. And the opposite happens too. If I get in my head in a negative way, sometimes that negative thing comes true. So got to be careful with that. But you make a plan. Look, if you're doing 1 or 2 deals a month, you need to get around either information, like I said, find somebody that resonates with you, or find a community that you can get into where you have people to chase, right? You have people that you can reach for that are going to blaze a trail and you can follow. I think that's really, really important there. There's a lot to be said about that. I could say, well, get the guts and do more marketing, but find somebody that resonates with you can follow, and basically just walk in their footsteps and do what they do, and you're going to have that. It's important to set a goal and have a goal to shoot for. I think that don't be a rudderless ship, but set a goal, follow somebody, and take action. Surround yourself with people that are fighting the same battle. They have the same type of goal, so you have somebody to share your experience with and maybe even challenge yourself against, and just get out there and do it. We can talk about systems and processes and tools all day long, but really it's a decision to do it, and then finding the resources and the experience to surround yourself to make it happen at the end of the day. And that's what I've done. I made a decision that I was going to do X amount of deals a month, and I decided, okay, this is the marketing I need to do it. And I started dropping the marketing and tracking the KPIs and adjusting the marketing and dialing it in. And then I was like, okay, this marketing has created these issues in my business. Now I need a lead manager. Now I need a second acquisitions person. And I started to build the business around that, if that makes sense.
Yeah. That makes sense. Cool. So Don, thank you so much. Where can we find you, and learn more about your documentation process? And do you have any program that you help people through this process of building a business, flipping or wholesaling, or what do you do?
So you can always find me at Flip Talk, just about anywhere you listen to the podcast. I will be, they've been kind of sporadic in the last couple of years, but I will be doing almost every day in 2026, really kind of talking about and documenting this process. You can always reach out to me via email at don@fliptalk.com. I do respond to those emails. We do run a small mastermind community, It's a tight-knit community by Party Foul called ICE, and you can go to beinthisroom.com if you want to learn more about ICE and what we do there. I try to be a resource. I try to be an open book. I try to, we talked about a lot of high-level stuff in the content I put out and stuff that I do. I try to really boil it down to all the nuts and bolts. And I just try to do as much as I can to serve the community. So anybody who wants to reach out is welcome to do it.
That's awesome, Don. Thank you so much. We appreciate you coming on, and we're excited to see what you launch. With the documentation process, I think that's really cool. So we'll definitely maybe do a follow-up podcast when that releases, if you're down.
Absolutely.
Sweet. All right, we'll talk soon.